an affirmative act, and that goes right along with what I've been saying all day yesterday. Was this had to be pilots trained specifically to fly these airplanes, and maybe not with a type rating, maybe not trained to the same level as a professional pilot, but trained enough so that they knew what to do in that cockpit and how to do it.
So anything you're hearing this morning, any of the new detail telling you whether or not you think in any case the hijackers had control of the controls, or whether they were simply coercing pilots?
Oh, they were no way they were going to coerce a pilot after a certain point, Diane. Basically, they might
loss of life that he would know would occur.
Charlie, you fight. You just fight to the death. I mean,
exactly.
Because you're going to die anyway if you do what they're telling you to. And we have a great sense in airline piloting of not only keeping the folks on board our aircraft safe, but we're talking about the folks on the ground too. And we really have a great sense of that. It's instilled in us. You wouldn't want to do that, and that it would just be a to heck with you. We're going to struggle it out right here situation.
Wouldn't want to do that. Wouldn't want to do that, and wouldn't do it. I can't believe for a minute that a pilot would. So they had to have controls of those planes. Before we let you go, I want to ask you one other question though.
You could manipulate the controls on an aircraft like this, and once it was in the air, and probably figure out the throttles and get someplace close to your target. But if you're a terrorist planning such an evil act as this, not one, two, three, but four of them, in other words, you want to hit this building twice, you want to hit the Pentagon, you want to hit something else, you don't want to take any chances that the pilots that you put in there are not going to be successful on the first pass. So you're going to train these people. You're going to train them specifically for a 757 and a 767. And there's a great suspicion in my mind that the reason that we see 757s and 767s is because they're the only two planes with what we call a common type rating. If you're trained in one, you're automatically trained in the other and licensed for it.
John, last question for you. We heard Lisa say earlier that there are reports this morning, of course, that the hijackers lured the pilots out of the cockpit by attacking the flight attendants in the back of the plane. I just wonder what the rule is when that happened. I guess I would have thought that immediately the cockpit would seal off, and as terrible as it would be, you wouldn't let the pilots be lured out.
We don't have any hard and fast rules, Diane. I don't believe any airline does that says, okay, if this, then that, in regards to somebody holding your flight attendants hostage or hurting your flight attendants or hurting your passengers back there. But one of the problems when we went down from a 3-person to a 2-person crew was you lost your ability to send a crew member back and still have 2 up there in the front. And so it's a much more gamey situation to send the pilot back when there's a problem in the back, especially one that might involve hijackers or takeover people, that you could lure one out, so to speak, by threatening the flight attendants in the back.
Well, as we say, they knew what they were doing, because if they were able to turn the transponders off and able to prevent the pilots from sending what is a very simple signal which alerts air traffic controllers that there's a hijacking in place, if they were able to prevent that, they had a lot of sophistication about how those planes operated. And the scenes that those pilots must have gone through, John, I know it must sicken you, and it does everybody
Charlie,
else.
it's a matter of perspective. I mean, it's hard for me even to think about the perspective of the fact that you and I, Diane, you and I too, will sit here sometimes and talk about a terrible airline crash. Fortunately, it's been nice and quiet for the last year, but we'll be talking about one.
We fire that they occasioned that eventually brought the buildings down. I say eventually, within just about an hour in each case. The stress of that kind of fire and the heat that was generated was just too much for the building structurally to withstand. And when you're talking about the fact that these planes were cross-country planes that had just taken off from Boston headed for the West Coast, they had how many gallons of jet fuel on board?
Around close to 10,000 gallons for the 757, close to 14,000 gallons for the 767. That's not precise, but it's in that general vicinity. Burned that down about 1,000 for the distance they traveled. But that too had to be by design, Charlie. And on top of that, I didn't know until yesterday. I'm not a structural guy for buildings, but I didn't know that the way to bring down a building like this was to fly something in at an upper level and create a heck of a fire like that. I would have thought that you'd blow it from the bottom. So these people knew exactly what to do, how to do it, and they set this thing up with incredible precision.
Yes.
There wasn't anything casual about this operation.
And with that amount of jet fuel, temperatures in those upper floors, 16,000 degrees, they talked about. We're going to go. Thanks very much, John Nance, who's out in Seattle. We'll talk to you again, John. Let's go to London. ABC's Ted.
I check in with everybody there.
Watch, and we have decided not to show them, but people did jump. They had to jump. And it's horrible to see. Were either of you there? Did you see it?
I actually was down by Water Street by the FDR Drive when I just actually got on the phone with my relatives, just telling them I was okay, and I saw the building go down, and it was the most frightening. You'll never forget that image, for the rest of your life. Just when I got home, so many phone calls to my relatives and my friends, just seeing if I was okay. I wanted to thank them all. But as we speak, there's some of my friends that are, unaccounted for, people that I went to college.
Got right up to the. Well, these are pictures from this. Tell me what I'm looking at. I think I'm looking at pictures from this morning. Yeah, these are pictures from this morning. And that gives you some sense of the scope of what has to be dealt with in terms of rubble that is down in the World Trade Center. Still, there's problem with fire. John Miller was pointing out that some of the debris from the collapsed building, even though it's been almost 23 hours since the building's actually collapsed, some of the debris still blew up this morning onto the roof of a building in Battery City Park. That building caught fire. Firemen had to deal with that blaze. An already overstretched fire department in New York had to deal with it and did so. But that's the scene this morning in New York City with this pile of rubble, steel, concrete.
As Charlie and Diane described to the nation what you were seeing in New York City, we want to bring you up to date, man.
Workers were trapped hundreds of feet up in the air. Those on the ground were powerless to help. Among them was Paul Lemos.
You see people standing on the ledges and just one at a time, just falling, jumping, and they would watch them and they would come flying down and their hands would be moving and stuff, and it was almost like they were trying to get help. And then you would just hear the boom, and they were landing all over the place.
As America comes to terms with the aftermath of these devastating attacks, these are just some of the many stories of individual suffering that will be told in the long months ahead. Sangeeta Maiska, BBC News.
As we've heard, the Secretary of State Colin Powell and the President have all talked about war being declared by